Hi, and welcome to part 3 in Everything I Know About Chronic Insomnia. And in this one, we're going to be looking at sleep and sleep hygiene. Now, it's highly likely that at some point on your journey, you've already discovered sleep hygiene or been told about it. I've been given the same NHS printouts about sleep hygiene by different doctors. But stick with it though, because I've got a couple of things I want to add here which might be a bit more surprising for you as regards this, but other people may not have really looked into sleep hygiene and may be unaware of the main aspects of it. So yeah, let's get into it. First of all, what is normal sleep and how much do you need? Now, I've emphasized the you here because it really is academic what anybody else needs. It's about you. What is normal sleep? Well, all we know is that our sleep is supposedly terrible. That's what we tell ourselves. And then we sort of implicitly believe that everybody else's sleep is perfect. We see them in the morning, they look great, they go through their day, they've got kids to take care of, maybe they're going out after work and stuff, and you just assume that they must sleep like absolute babies. I'm here to tell you that this is not true, okay? But it is easy to lose sight of that. And because of those two extremes, our terrible sleep, everybody else's perfect sleep, we lose sight of what is normal sleep. You can't control sleep. There are no guarantees, and one of the most common mistakes to make with insomnia is that because we are pragmatic beings and we solve so many problems by thinking, we think we can think our way to sleep, and you just can't. All of the sleep you've ever had, and I can't underline this enough, all of the sleep you've ever had has been nothing to do with you. In terms of the moment you dropped off to sleep, you had nothing to do with it. It is what's called an autonomic reaction. It's one of two autonomic reactions, I believe, in the body, the other being breathing, which happens automatically. You can breathe. Breathing is an interesting one because you can breathe manually, and also you'll breathe unless you have a certain medical condition called, I think it's sleep apnea. You will breathe without doing it consciously. Your body will just carry on doing it without your awareness. But you can't control sleep. So however much you try, and people do, and they use certain tools, and they use what are those videos called, ASMR or something like that, or some combination of those letters, to do with modifying the brain but with really quiet talking, and it will send you to sleep and stuff. Maybe that works for some people. I don't think it's going to help if you're a chronic insomniac, because you put too much hope in it and you're trying to engineer the situation. So the focus in these videos is going to be getting yourself in your nervous system into a state where sleep happens by itself. You can't force sleep, and trying to do so only makes you more frustrated, and it never ever brings about sleep. Sleep, by definition, is the cessation of mental activity. Not all mental activity, a lot happens in your brain at night, but the sort of conscious mental activity. So you trying to bring it about by mental activity is never going to bring you anything. The next thing I want to mention is sleep is cyclical. Okay, so it's what's called the ultradian, I'm not sure, rhythms. Most people, again I emphasize most, it does vary, it doesn't matter if you're slightly under this or over, have 67 90-ish minute cycles. Now actually it can be 70 minutes to 110 minutes, but 90 is maybe the average. It's what you normally read in sleep hygiene. What that means is within these cycles you go through different stages. Now you have deep sleep, you have light sleep, you have what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, you have the stage of your cycle where you're dreaming, and then you sort of come back into more shallow sleep, and then the whole thing goes again. And here's the interesting thing, it's very common to wake between those cycles. So if you're thinking that everybody goes to bed and they fall asleep and they know nothing else until the morning, and they're just out for the count until 7, 8, 9 in the morning, it's not true. Some people maybe, but most people actually do wake at some part in the night. In fact, not to jump ahead too much, later I'm going to talk about therapy. One of the most interesting things I discovered in therapy whilst doing CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, was to do a survey of people in my circle, family, friends, colleagues, and so on, about their sleep patterns, how much they slept, and how many times they woke rather. I forgot how to speak English. And the number of times they woke in the night was startling. So I was so used to thinking it was just me, but so many people wake up repeatedly in the night. Some people said like 5-6 times. You might think that's incredible, but now it doesn't necessarily mean that they're up and about, but they are conscious and they remember it, otherwise they couldn't say how many times. So that's how your sleep is, or how sleep is structured. And as I've already mentioned, other people sleep less than you think. We think that everybody has perfect sleep because we have imperfect sleep. This is kind of how it always goes. We go from one extreme to the other, and we think that our problem is the worst problem, and everybody else by definition doesn't have that problem. But people do not sleep perfectly. My dad, for example, he sleeps about 4 hours a night. He's always telling me about waking up in the middle of the night, or he can't get to sleep. He's a really interesting one because he will then yawn for most of the day. But here's the thing, he's generally fine and happy. So what's he doing that we haven't been able to do? You know, clearly he has highly irregular sleep, and so do we, but he's found a way to be at peace with it. And we're going to get into that a bit later. So don't kid yourself that everybody else goes to bed at 10, wakes up at 6, 7, whatever, and they're fresh as a daisy and they remember nothing about the night time and they just sleep the whole way through. It just isn't true. So yeah, it's worth maybe asking people around about their sleep, just to give you some perspective. And perspective is very important when you're suffering. As I've mentioned previously, poor sleep is nearly always, arguably always, a symptom of something wider. It is not in and of itself its own thing. It is a manifestation of other issues going on in your life. And we've talked about a few of those in brief. We're going to get into those in future videos. But that's kind of the prep, the background for sleep hygiene. Of sleep hygiene itself, here's a few points. But I mentioned that I had something to say that is maybe a little contrarian to what you'd heard about sleep hygiene, and it is this: don't get too hung up on sleep hygiene, and do break the rules when you're having good periods. I'll get into that more in a second. But generally, good ideas for sleep hygiene are as follows: have a dark room. Don't go completely paranoid about, you must get rid of every last little bit of light coming in through the windows or whatever. But generally have a dark room. It's good to have blackout curtains because they just keep out more light. And if you're living in a place where there's neighbours' lights coming through or street lights or something, it can be a good thing. So blackout curtains are a good idea, or blackout blinds. Generally the room wants to be quite a moderate temperature, erring on the side of colder rather than warmer. Cold enough that you need to be under blankets. Apparently we sleep better that way, so you don't want to be running your heating on all night. You should need to be under blankets, i.e. you should be cold if you're not in the blankets. So generally a little colder rather than warmer. Goes without saying that you want it to be a quiet room. Use earplugs if necessary. You can get some really soft, spongy ones. If you live in the UK, I get these from Boots. You get a box of quite a few. They last you forever, and they're really comfortable in. They're so lightweight, and they're really good. I mean, they don't obviously keep all noise out. A really determined dog walking past or something might still get through to you, but generally, I've slept with them now for many years, and they're a great help. And just keep TVs and screens out of the room. Seriously, the number of people you see with TVs in the bedroom, or games consoles and iPads or whatever, it really is not the place. If you sleep like a baby, fine, okay, maybe have a TV in the room. It still kind of seems a bit sacrilegious to me. It's supposed to be a room of calm. It's a room where you go to rest. So if you're struggling with sleep, absolutely get the TV out of the room. The TV, you can watch TV in another room. Nobody's taking TV away from you. Although more about TV later. But yeah, that's just an easy win. Get TVs and screens out of the room in general. But as I mentioned, don't get too hung up on this and do break the rules. What I found with sleep hygiene, and in fact insomnia in general, is if you treat it like you are under this strict regimen, like you're in the army or something, and I mustn't do this and I mustn't do that, even though other people do, I have to go to bed at a certain time, I've got to get up at this time, I can't use my phone in bed, I can never have my laptop and watch something in bed, and all these other things. You get into this narrative of, oh, poor me, I can't do X, Y, Z, or I have to do X, Y, Z, and everybody else doesn't need to do these things. They don't need to care about it. Here's the thing, sleep hygiene is a guide only. If you take it too far, it becomes something you'll resent. So what I do is when I'm in a good phase, I absolutely take my laptop in there sometimes if I want to watch something before bed. I know I'm contradicting myself about no TVs and screen there, but in a sense I do it to show myself that I'm not bound to this. I'm not like, there's not like a bondage aspect to this, that I can trust myself in a good period to break the rules a bit, because we all have to break the rules in different areas just to have that sense of liberation. So don't take this too far. Don't get hung up on rules. These are guidelines. They're generally good ideas about a dark room, not having screens and things. But yeah, I've had really good periods where I break all the rules. I go to bed far too late. I'm on the laptop late, and I sleep absolutely great. I've had times when I've observed sleep hygiene and all the rules and everything everybody advises, and I have absolutely terrible nights, terrible periods. So that tells you it's only a guide. Don't get too caught up on it. Another one that I use is sometimes I go to sleep straight away. Often I don't. And what I'll do if I don't is I will kind of allow my brain to go into an area of what I call cozy and familiar thoughts. Now, these need to be really unchallenging. It's not about work the next day. It's not about problems in your life. It's about something that for you gives you a warm feeling. Now, that's going to differ for everyone. Mine is going to sound really silly, but I grew up spending an alarming amount of time playing Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo, and I tend to just go through the characters in my head and remembering like their special moves and stuff, and kind of like the backstory that they had and stuff. It's kind of brainless thinking, and that's the entire point of it. There's no challenge there. I'm just reminiscing. It's just cozy. That is the word. It's cozy thoughts. And very often, again, it isn't done conditionally. Like, this is a technique to get me to sleep. None of this is about engineering sleep, because as we've talked about, you can't do that. You can't make yourself fall asleep. But what you can do is engineer an environment and a state of mind and a state of nervous system that will give you every chance of sleep. And that's what we're about. We're not trying to force it here. So cozy thoughts I tend to find quite helpful. Another one that I do, I don't know how common this is, but when I was really struggling, I used to find that the simple act of laying down on the pillow, going from standing upright to laying down horizontally on the pillow, was itself a bit too much of a jarring change and would bring about that kind of fight or flight response. It's going to sound ridiculous to people that sleep fine. How can it be scary laying down, So what I did was I kind of developed this half sitting, half laying position where you sort of look slumped, where you are slumped against your pillows. So I tend to prop my pillows up, not fully as I'm sat up reading in bed, but half between the position I would have them in as if I were laying completely horizontally and the position I would have them in if I was sat up reading. And you're just kind of slumped on them. And I find that helps because it's almost like an intro into sleeping. I suppose the only downside is it does feel like a bit of a prop having to do this. So try it out for yourself. If you have no problem getting to sleep, or the act of laying down doesn't trigger you, then you probably don't need this. But I quite like this. It allows me to sort of settle into bed, get cozy, get warm, and then at some point in the night, and very often I don't remember doing it, which of course is the entire point, I will then lay down, fully. So you don't spend all night like that. I have woken up hours later still in that position, but I tend to find that's quite a nice way to sort of sink into into sleep in a way that doesn't trigger some sort of scary reaction in the brain. That having been said, try not to construct elaborate practices. Now, if you're a tennis fan, you may be aware that the Rafael Nadal, he is known for his elaborate, almost, well, not almost, but actually superstitious practices about touching his socks, the position of his water bottle. He's got a really interesting routine. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to avoid with sleep. We need to make this feel as natural as possible and something that we're choosing to do, not make it feel like, okay, it's bedtime, I've now got a checklist of things to do. I've got to go to work, basically. That is not the right vibe. I've got to go to work. I've got to go and make sure the room's the right temperature. I've got to go and make sure I'm wearing the right underwear. I don't know, I mean, maybe that's a bit silly. I've got to lay in the right position. I need to lay like that, or I need to lay at that end of the bed, not this end of the bed. Whatever the rules are, because this probably resonates with you. Maybe you've constructed some rules to try to help yourself get to sleep. The reality is they don't tend to help. They just become sort of emblematic of the problem. Whereas everybody else just goes to bed, we go to bed and do like a checklist of things to do before you can actually have any hope of sleep, and often then don't get any sleep. So if you find yourself going through an almost superstitious set of practices, just as a way to sort of bargain with the universe to please give me some sleep, look at all these things I'm doing, it might be time to just let up on that. Finally, have a notepad to record any thoughts that would otherwise keep you awake. Now, these tend to be work thoughts for me. I'm a software engineer, so it's not uncommon that at any time of the day I might have a thought about something I need to do, or some bit of my code I need to modify, or some feature that I forgot to put live on the web server, or something, it doesn't matter what it is, or some meeting that I need to arrange. Now, of course, these can keep us awake just like anything else can. Now, by having a notepad and put them down, the good thing is you're going through the action of getting it out of your head. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to forget it if you don't do that. You may actually wake up in the morning and remember the thing anyway, and actually making a note wasn't necessary. But what it does is it's a formality that tells your brain that I'm willing to let go of this bit of information. I don't need to ruminate on it. I don't need to devote any CPU to actually remembering it, because I've got it down on this paper. And then if you do remember it tomorrow, well then great. But at least you give yourself that permission to get it out of your head. So I find that can be quite helpful. But just finally, again, on sleep hygiene, don't get too hung up on this. Nobody seems to say that. Certainly not any of the doctors and literature from the NHS that I've had. It reads as though you have an absolute checklist of things to do when you go to bed. Check the room temperature, check the curtains, get rid of all bits of light, use the earplugs, make sure it's quiet, make sure you're wearing this, make sure you lay in this position, make sure your pillows are kind of this. It just makes it worse. So these are ideas. Some of them may suit you, some of them may help, but they are not prerequisites to get to sleep.